The coffee in Emily Thompson's mug had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on a computer screen in front of her, watching a strange sound pattern scrolled across the display. It was 3 a.m. at the Mariana Trench Deep Sea Research Station, and something unusual was happening in the depths below. Emily pushed her glasses back up her nose and leaned closer to the screen. After 5 years of studying whale songs and other marine sounds, she knew this was different. The pattern wasn't random like most deep-sea noises. It had a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat, but not quite. She reached for the phone and pressed the button for the main lab. "Jack, you need to see this," she said when her colleague answered. "I know it's late, but this is important." Dr. Jack Miller arrived 10 minutes later, his gray hair messy and his lab coat thrown hastily over his pajamas. He had been the chief scientist at the station for over a decade, and Emily had never seen him look so confused as when he stared at her screen. "What am I looking at?" he asked, rubbing his tired eyes. "That's just it," Emily said, pointing to the regular peaks and valleys in the sound wave. "It's not like anything in our database. It's too regular to be natural, but we're picking it up from about 30,000 feet down. Nothing man-made can function at that depth." Jack pulled up a chair and started typing, bringing up other displays. The sound was coming from somewhere near the bottom of the trench, where the pressure was enough to crush a submarine like a soda can. The water there was pitch black and freezing cold, yet something was making these sounds. Could it be a malfunction? Jack asked, but Emily was already shaking her head. "I checked all 3 backup systems. They're all picking up the same thing." She played the sound through the speakers, after adjusting it to a frequency humans could hear. The room filled with a deep, rhythmic humming that made the coffee cups vibrate on the desk. Just then, Thomas Anderson, their audio specialist, burst into the room. His face was flushed with excitement. "You guys hearing this too?" he asked, waving his tablet. "It's not just one signal anymore. There's a pattern forming." The 3 scientists huddled around the main screen as Thomas plugged in his tablet. He had written a quick program to analyze the sound patterns, and what they saw made Emily's heart race. The sounds weren't random at all. They were repeating in a specific sequence. "Look at the intervals," Thomas said, pointing to his analysis. It's counting something." Jack reached for the phone on the wall. "I'm calling Commander Hayes at the Navy Research Division. They need to know about this." Emily barely heard him. She was too busy watching as new patterns emerged on her screen. Whatever was making these sounds, it was getting more active. The signals were coming faster now, and they were changing. "It's like it knows we're listening," she whispered, more to herself than the others. The room grew quiet except for the steady hum of the computers and that strange, rhythmic sound from the depths. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. In all her years of marine research, she had never encountered anything like this. Something was down there in the darkness, something that shouldn't exist at those depths, something that was making sounds that seemed almost intelligent. As the sun began to rise over the Pacific, casting its first rays through the station's thick windows, Emily knew their quiet research mission was about to change dramatically. Whatever they had discovered in the depths of the Mariana Trench, it was going to make waves in the scientific community, and possibly change their understanding of what lived in Earth's deepest waters. The signal continued its steady broadcast from the darkness below, like a beacon calling them deeper into the mystery of the abyss. And Emily Thompson, despite her scientific training and natural skepticism, couldn't shake the feeling that something down there was trying to get their attention. She was right, but she had no idea just how right she was, or how deep this mystery would take them. 3 days had passed since they first heard the strange sounds, and the research station was now buzzing with activity. Emily hadn't left the lab for more than a few hours at a time, and empty coffee cups littered her desk. Thomas Anderson sat next to her, his eyes red from staring at computer screens. "There it is again," Thomas said, pointing to his screen. "Look at the numbers, Emily. They're not random at all." He pulled up a sequence of figures that made Emily's eyes widen. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Emily read out loud. These are prime numbers. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The sound patterns were following a mathematical sequence that couldn't possibly be natural. The door to the lab opened, and Commander Michael Hayes walked in, followed by Jack. The Navy commander looked out of place in his crisp uniform among the scientists in their casual clothes. His presence at the station had caused quite a stir. "Dr. Thompson, Mr. Anderson," Hayes said, nodding to them. "Show me what you found." Thomas played the recording, now converted into a visual pattern on the big screen. "The sounds come in bursts," he explained, keeping his words simple. "Each burst contains a specific number of pulses. When we count them, they form prime numbers in sequence." Hayes frowned. Could this be some kind of natural phenomenon? "No way," Emily said firmly. "Nature doesn't count in prime numbers. This is a pattern that only comes from intelligence." She pulled up another screen showing ocean current data. "And there's more. The signal is getting stronger, but the pattern stays the same no matter what the ocean currents are doing." Jack stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "We've checked with every research station and submarine in the Pacific. Nobody has anything like this in their records. Whatever's making these sounds, it's not one of ours." Commander Hayes was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screens. "What about Russian or Chinese submarines?" he asked finally. Thomas shook his head. "The sounds are coming from too deep. No submarine can go that far down without being crushed. Besides, the energy readings are off the charts. It would take more power than a nuclear submarine's reactor to make sounds this loud at that depth." Just then, one of the junior scientists burst into the room. "Dr. Thompson, the pattern, it's changing." Everyone rushed to the main display. The familiar prime number sequence had suddenly shifted. Now new pulses were appearing between the old ones, creating a more complex pattern. Emily's fingers flew over the keyboard as she analyzed the new data. It's responding to our monitoring," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Every time we focus our instruments on it, the pattern gets more complex. Almost like it knows we're studying it," Thomas added quietly. Commander Hayes straightened up. "Dr. Thompson, I'm giving you full access to the Navy's deep-sea monitoring network. Whatever this is, we need to understand it." He pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway to make some calls. Jack looked at Emily with concern. "You realize what this means. If this really is some kind of intelligent signal, then we're not alone," Emily finished. "But the real question is, who built something that could survive at those depths, and how long has it been down there?" The screens continued to show the evolving patterns, now forming shapes that looked almost like letters from an unknown alphabet. Emily felt a mix of excitement and fear. They were about to make the biggest discovery in human history, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were also about to open a door that couldn't be closed. Thomas suddenly sat up straighter. "Wait a minute," he said, pointing to a new pattern emerging on the screen. "Is it just me, or does this look like coordinates?" Emily leaned in closer, her heart pounding. The new sequence of pulses did seem to form a very specific pattern, one that could only mean one thing. Whatever was down there wasn't just sending signals, it was inviting them to come find it. As the team gathered around the screens, studying the new data, none of them noticed the slight tremor that ran through the station's floor, or the way the deep-sea pressure gauges had begun to show unusual readings. Something was changing in the depths below, and their discovery was just the beginning. Rachel Cooper had piloted deep-sea vessels for 15 years, but she had never seen a submersible like this one. The Nautilus was a marvel of engineering, built to withstand pressures that would crush normal submarines like tin cans. As she ran through the pre-dive checklist, she could feel the excitement from her passengers. "All systems are green," she announced to the team strapped into their seats behind her. "Final pressure check complete." Emily Thompson sat directly behind Rachel, her tablet computer already recording data. Next to her was Brian Foster, the engineering expert who had helped design the Nautilus. Lieutenant David Wilson from the Navy sat in the fourth seat, his face serious as he monitored his own instruments. "Remember," Rachel said as she began the descent procedures, "we're going deeper than any crewed vessel in history. If anything feels wrong, we turn back immediately. No arguments." The surface of the ocean disappeared above them as the Nautilus sank into the darkness. The powerful lights on the vessel cut through the water, but they couldn't reach very far in the increasing gloom. Every 1,000 feet, Rachel stopped to check the hull integrity. At 5,000 feet, they passed a group of strange jellyfish, their bodies glowing with blue light. Emily recorded everything, her eyes wide with wonder. "The bioluminescence patterns are unlike anything in our records," she said. At 15,000 feet, the water pressure made the hull creak. Brian checked his instruments carefully. "Hull integrity at 98%, he reported. "The new alloy is holding better than expected." Lieutenant Wilson kept checking his sonar readings. The mysterious signal was getting stronger as they went deeper. "We're definitely going in the right direction," he said. "The sound pattern is clearer now." At 25,000 feet, they saw something that made them all catch their breath. A cloud of creatures with glowing patterns on their bodies swam past the submersible. The patterns seemed to change and pulse, almost like they were communicating. "Those shouldn't exist," Emily whispered, recording frantically. "Nothing this deep should have such complex light organs." Rachel kept the Nautilus steady as they descended further. The water pressure outside was now greater than anywhere humans had gone before. The hull groaned under the immense weight of the ocean above them. At 30,000 feet, they hit a layer of water that was strangely clear, clearer than it should be at this depth. The temperature readings also made no sense. The water was warmer than it should be. "There's some kind of current here," Rachel said, fighting to keep the submersible stable. "It's not natural." Suddenly, their instruments went crazy. The sonar showed something massive ahead of them, but the water was still too dark to see it. The mysterious signal they had been tracking was now so strong it made their equipment vibrate. "Look," Emily pointed through the front viewport. In the distance, something was glowing with a soft blue light. It wasn't like the bioluminescent creatures they had seen before. This light was steady and seemed to form geometric patterns. As they got closer, Brian's face went pale. "That's not possible," he said, checking and rechecking his readings. "I'm picking up energy signatures. Something down here is using power." The Nautilus's lights finally reached the source of the glow. Everyone in the submersible fell silent. Rising out of the darkness was a massive structure, its surface covered in patterns that pulsed with blue light. It was clearly not natural. The lines were too straight, the angles too perfect. "Are those doors?" Lieutenant Wilson asked, pointing to what looked like a massive entranceway in the structure. Rachel carefully maneuvered the Nautilus closer. The structure was enormous, disappearing into the darkness above and below them. The glowing patterns seemed to respond to their presence, growing brighter as they approached. "We need to report this," Lieutenant Wilson said, reaching for the communication system. But before he could send a message, the structure pulsed with a new pattern of lights, and all their communications equipment went dead. They were 6 miles under the ocean, cut off from the surface, facing something that shouldn't exist. And as they watched, the massive doors in front of them began to move. The massive doors slowly opened inward, revealing a dimly lit chamber beyond. Inside the Nautilus, everyone held their breath. The structure's blue lights pulsed in a pattern that seemed to beckon them forward. "What do we do?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel gripped the submersible's controls tightly. "Standard protocol says we should return to the surface and report this. But we've lost communications, and we're running on battery power. We might not have enough power for a return trip if we wait too long." Brian checked his instruments again. "The chamber beyond those doors. It's dry inside. There's some kind of force field holding the water back. I've never seen anything like it." "That's impossible." Lieutenant Wilson said, but they could all see it. Where the water met the doorway, it simply stopped, as if hitting an invisible wall. Rachel carefully moved the Nautilus closer to the entrance. Their instruments showed that the chamber beyond was massive, big enough to hold several submarines. As they approached the force field, the water around them began to move strangely. "Something's pulling us in," Rachel announced, trying to maintain control. "It's some kind of current, or maybe a tractor beam." The Nautilus passed through the force field. It felt like moving through thick jelly for a moment. Then they were through. The water drained away from their vessel, leaving them in an enormous dry dock. Lights came on automatically, revealing metallic walls covered in the same glowing patterns they had seen outside. "Atmosphere readings?" Rachel asked, still not quite believing what she was seeing. Brian studied his displays. "The air outside is breathable. Temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. No toxic gases. It's like it was made for humans to enter." "That doesn't make any sense," Lieutenant Wilson said. "This structure has to be ancient, but everything looks new." Emily was already unbuckling her safety harness. "We need to go out there. This could be the greatest discovery in human history." Rachel knew she should stop them, but her own curiosity was too strong. Following safety protocols, they ran through their equipment checks. Each person put on a lightweight emergency breathing apparatus, just in case the air readings were wrong. The team carefully exited the Nautilus. Their boots touched the metallic floor with soft clangs that echoed through the enormous chamber. The walls hummed with energy, and the glowing patterns seemed to follow their movements. "Look at this," Brian called out. He was examining what appeared to be a control panel near the inner doorway. "These markings, they're not random designs, they're some kind of writing." Emily approached the panel, her scientist's mind racing. "The symbols, they're similar to the patterns we detected in the sound signals." She reached out slowly, her hand hovering over one of the glowing symbols. "Wait," Lieutenant Wilson called out, but it was too late. Emily's finger touched the symbol. Immediately, the entire chamber lit up with bright blue light. A humming sound filled the air, and more symbols appeared on the walls, flowing like water. "It's responding to human touch," Brian said in amazement. "This technology, it's far beyond anything we have. But how did it last down here for so long?" Before anyone could answer, a new sound filled the chamber. It was like the signals they had detected from the surface, but different now, clearer, almost like speech. The patterns on the walls pulsed in sync with the sound. "It's trying to communicate," Emily said excitedly. She took out her tablet computer, which was somehow still working. "The patterns match what we saw in the research station, but now they're much more complex." Rachel felt a vibration through her boots. "Something's happening. The inner doors are opening." The team watched as another set of massive doors slowly parted, revealing a long corridor beyond. The lights inside pulsed in a way that seemed to invite them forward. "We shouldn't go further," Lieutenant Wilson said, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew they had passed the point of turning back the moment they entered the structure. "Whatever built this place," Emily said, "they wanted us to find it. They left us a map and those sound patterns. This isn't just first contact, it's an invitation." The corridor seemed endless, its walls glowing with the same blue light they had seen before. Emily led the way, following the pulsing patterns that guided them deeper into the structure. Behind her, Brian kept checking his instruments while Rachel and Lieutenant Wilson watched their backs. "The energy readings are getting stronger," Brian said, looking at his handheld device. "Whatever powers this place, it's still working after who knows how long." They reached a circular room with a high ceiling. In the center stood what looked like a control station, with curved screens made of some clear material. As they entered, the screens came to life, filling with moving symbols. "It's the same writing system we saw before," Emily said, approaching the central console. "But look at this." She pointed to images appearing on the screens. They showed Earth, but it looked different. The continents were in different positions. That's Earth during the age of dinosaurs, she explained, her voice full of wonder. This place, it's millions of years old. Suddenly, the screens changed. They showed creatures that looked nothing like anything on Earth, beings that seemed to be made partly of crystal and organic matter. They lived in cities under the ocean, had advanced technology, and watched over the Earth's oceans. They were here before us, Rachel whispered, an advanced civilization living in the oceans while dinosaurs walked on land. More images appeared. The crystal beings were working on something big, a network of stations deep in the oceans. The stations monitored the Earth's oceans, keeping track of temperatures, currents, and sea life. It's a monitoring system, Brian said, finally understanding. This whole place is part of a network designed to watch over Earth's oceans, and it's still working. Lieutenant Wilson had been quiet, but now he spoke up. But why? Why build all this and leave it running? As if answering his question, the screens changed again. They showed a terrible disaster, a massive asteroid hitting the Earth. The crystal beings knew it was coming. They couldn't stop it, but they could preserve their knowledge. They built these stations to last, Emily said, touching one of the screens. They knew they wouldn't survive, but they wanted their work to continue. They were protecting Earth's oceans. Brian moved to another console that had started glowing. Look at this. It's showing current data, ocean temperatures, pollution levels, sea life populations. This station has been collecting data for millions of years. The screens filled with graphs and charts, showing changes in the Earth's oceans over millions of years. The team could see how ocean temperatures had changed, how sea life had evolved, and how human activity was now affecting the seas. That's why the signal started getting stronger, Emily realized. The station detected that our oceans are in trouble. It was trying to warn us. Rachel walked around the room, looking at more displays. These stations aren't just monitoring. Look, they're actively helping to stabilize ocean currents and temperatures. They'd been helping Earth's oceans stay healthy all this time. Lieutenant Wilson looked troubled. If this technology gets into the wrong hands. This isn't about military power, Emily interrupted. This is about survival. These beings left us a gift, a way to understand and protect our oceans. Suddenly, all the screens changed at once. A new set of images appeared, showing more stations like this one, spread across Earth's oceans. Small dots of light showed their locations. There are more, Brian said in amazement. This isn't the only station. There's a whole network. The team stood in silence, taking in the weight of their discovery. They had found not just an ancient structure, but the key to understanding Earth's oceans and possibly saving them. But before they could discuss what to do next, a deep rumble shook the station. Red lights started flashing on the screens, and an alarm sound filled the air. What's happening? Rachel asked, steadying herself against a console. Brian's face went pale as he read the data appearing before them. Something's wrong with the station's systems, and if this place doesn't stay stable. He looked at his teammates with worry. It could affect ocean currents across the entire planet. The whole station shook again, harder this time. More red warning lights flashed across the screens, and the peaceful blue glow of the walls turned to an angry red. Brian, what's happening? Emily asked, grabbing onto the central console to keep her balance. Brian's fingers flew across the strange controls, trying to understand the alien symbols. The station's defense systems think we're a threat. It's starting an emergency shutdown. His face grew pale. If this place shuts down, it'll stop controlling the ocean currents. The changes could cause massive storms, maybe even tsunamis. Rachel pulled up more screens, showing maps of the ocean currents around them. Already, they could see the patterns changing as the station's influence weakened. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe an hour at most, Brian said. He pointed to one screen where numbers were counting down. When that reaches 0, everything stops. Lieutenant Wilson reached for his emergency radio, even though they all knew it wouldn't work this deep. "We need to get back to the surface. Warn people." "There's no time," Emily said firmly. She moved to stand next to Brian at the controls. "We have to stop it here." "Brian, what do you need?" Brian wiped sweat from his forehead. "The system thinks we're trying to take over. We need to prove we're here to help, not harm." He pointed to symbols flowing across the screens. "These patterns, they're like a code. If we can match them correctly, maybe we can show the station we understand its purpose." The station shook again. Through the clear walls of the control room, they could see powerful currents forming in the water outside. The pressure gauges on their emergency gear started beeping in warning. Rachel joined them at the console. "What about the sound patterns we recorded at the surface? They were trying to communicate with us then. Could we use them now?" Emily's eyes lit up. She pulled out her tablet computer where she had saved all their research. "Yes. Look at this." She pointed to the original sound patterns they had recorded. "They matched these symbols here. It's the same language." Another alarm started blaring. Part of the ceiling crashed down at the far end of the room, and water began spraying in through the crack. "We're running out of time," Lieutenant Wilson shouted over the noise. He grabbed a piece of broken metal and wedged it against the crack, trying to slow the water. Brian and Emily worked frantically at the console, trying to input the correct sequence of symbols. Rachel helped while keeping an eye on the spreading cracks in the walls. The station's structure was starting to fail under the changing pressure from the disrupted currents. "There," Emily shouted suddenly. The prime number sequence, it wasn't just a signal, it was an access code. Her fingers danced across the symbols, entering the numbers they had first detected from the surface. The station rumbled deeply, but this time it felt different. The red lights flickered, then started turning blue again. The countdown on the screen stopped with less than 10 minutes remaining. New symbols appeared on the main screen. Brian read them quickly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's accepting the code. The defense systems are powering down." But their relief was short-lived. While the station had stopped its shutdown sequence, the damage to the structure was already done. Water was now pouring in from several cracks, and the whole room groaned under the enormous pressure. "The station's hull is compromised," Rachel said, checking the structural readings. "Even if we stop the shutdown, this section could collapse any minute." Emily looked around desperately. There had to be a way to save both themselves and the station. Humanity needed this technology, needed to understand what the crystal beings had known about protecting Earth's oceans. Then she saw it, another set of symbols appearing on a side screen. They showed a schematic of the station, with a second control room in a different section, and it was still intact. "There's a backup control center," she shouted over the noise of rushing water. "But we have to get there fast. This whole section is about to flood." The team looked at the dark corridor leading away from the failing control room. Somewhere down there was their only chance to save themselves and the station. But with water pouring in and the structure becoming more unstable by the minute, reaching it would be more dangerous than anything they'd faced so far. Cold water rushed around their ankles as the team ran through the dark corridor. Their emergency lights cast jumping shadows on the walls. Emily led the way, following the map she had memorized from the control room screen. "Left here," she shouted, turning down another hallway. The water was getting deeper, now up to their knees. Behind them, they could hear the groaning of metal as more sections of the station began to fail. Brian checked his tablet as they ran. "The main control room is completely flooded now. If we don't get the backup systems online soon, the whole network of stations will start shutting down." They reached a sealed door. Lieutenant Wilson and Rachel pushed against it together, but it wouldn't budge. The station's power problems had frozen it shut. "There has to be a manual override," Rachel said, running her hands along the doorframe. These beings were too smart not to have a backup plan. Emily spotted familiar symbols next to the door. They were like the ones from the control room, but simpler. "Here," she said, pressing them in the same sequence they had used before. The door creaked open just enough for them to squeeze through. The backup control center was smaller than the main room, but it was still impressive. Screens lined the walls, showing the status of ocean currents around the world. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. "The station's trying to keep the currents stable," Brian said, looking at the readings. "But without full power, it's failing. Look at these temperature changes. They're already affecting weather patterns on the surface." Lieutenant Wilson's emergency radio crackled to life, surprising everyone. Through the static, they could hear voices from the research station above. The backup control room must have been boosting their signal somehow. "Massive storms forming. Unprecedented wave heights. Need immediate." The radio cut out again. "We have to interface our technology with theirs," Emily said, pulling out her tablet. "The station is already accepting our input codes. Maybe it will accept our data protocols too." Rachel looked skeptical. "Interface modern computers with million-year-old alien technology. Is that even possible?" "We have to try," Brian said. He opened his equipment bag and pulled out cables and adapters. The crystal beings were trying to protect Earth. They made this place to last, to be used by whoever came after them. They must have built in ways to upgrade it. The water was starting to seep under the door now. They didn't have much time. Emily and Brian worked frantically to connect their tablets to the station's systems. Rachel and Lieutenant Wilson tried to seal the door better, using pieces of their equipment to block the gaps. "Look at this," Emily said suddenly. One of the screens was showing new symbols. "The station. It's scanning our devices. It's learning our technology." Brian's tablet suddenly lit up with streams of data. "It's working. The station is accepting our input. But there's too much data. Our devices can't process it fast enough." "What if we network them?" Rachel suggested, pulling out her own tablet. "Link all our devices together. Give the station more processing power." They quickly connected all their tablets and phones together. The station's screens flickered, then stabilized. The red warning lights started turning blue again. "The current patterns are stabilizing," Brian said, watching the readings. "The station is adapting, using our devices to help control its systems." Emily looked at the main screen in amazement. The station was now displaying information in both the crystal beings' symbols and in English. It had learned their language from their devices. "This is what they wanted," she said softly. "They built this place not just to last, but to evolve. To work with whoever found it." Lieutenant Wilson's radio crackled again. This time the voice was clearer. "Storms are dissipating. Ocean patterns returning to normal. What did you do down there?" The team looked at each other with relief and pride. Humanity had faced its first test with the crystal being's legacy, and they had passed. But as the water continued to rise outside their door, they knew they weren't safe yet. "We've stabilized the ocean currents," Rachel said, "but this section of the station is still compromised. We need to find a way back to the Nautilus." The station, as if hearing her words, brought up a new map on the main screen. It showed them a path, not back to their submersible, but to something else. Something the crystal beings had left behind, waiting for the right moment to be found. 1 month after their incredible deep-sea discovery, Emily stood at the window of the newly established International Deep Ocean Research Center. The facility had been quickly built on top of their original research station, and now dozens of scientists from around the world worked there. Below the waves, the ancient station was fully operational again. After they had stabilized its systems, the Crystal Beings facility had helped them find a way back to their submersible. More importantly, it had given them access to its vast database of knowledge about Earth's oceans. "The latest data is ready," Brian called from his workstation. The screens in front of him showed ocean temperatures and currents from all over the world. The network of ancient stations was now working together with modern satellites and monitoring systems. "Look at this," Rachel said, pointing to one of the screens. The station predicted these storm patterns 3 weeks in advance. We've already saved hundreds of lives by evacuating coastal areas before the storms hit. Emily nodded, remembering their terrifying experience in the depths. The crystal beings left us more than just technology. They left us a responsibility. Lieutenant Wilson, who had been promoted to commander after their discovery, walked into the room. He was now the military liaison between the research center and the world's governments. The United Nations has finally agreed. All the station's technology will be used only for peaceful purposes, studying and protecting the oceans. Speaking of studying, Brian said excitedly, "You need to see what we found in the latest data translations." He pulled up a new screen showing complex charts and diagrams. The crystal beings didn't just monitor the oceans. They had found ways to clean them, to remove pollution and plastic waste. Emily moved closer to the screen. "Can we replicate their methods?" "We're already testing a smaller version," Rachel answered. She pressed a button, and a video feed appeared showing underwater drones at work. The drones were using modified versions of the crystal beings' technology to clean up a patch of ocean garbage. "The public response has been amazing," Lieutenant Wilson added. "People around the world are fascinated by the crystal beings' story. It's changing how everyone thinks about the oceans." Emily smiled, remembering something else they had found in the station's database. They knew they wouldn't survive the asteroid impact, but they believed that one day another species would evolve that could continue their work. "And they prepared everything for us," Brian said. "The prime number signals, the universal mathematical language, the adaptable technology. They made it possible for us to understand and use their legacy." A young scientist rushed into the room, her face excited. "Dr. Thompson, we've decoded more of the historical database. There are other stations we haven't found yet, and they contain something else, something the crystal beings left for us to find when we're ready." Emily felt a familiar thrill of discovery. The crystal beings had been right to trust in the future. Humanity had found their gift, understood its importance, and was proving worthy of the responsibility. "The oceans were always the key," she said, looking out at the waves again. "Not just to understanding Earth's past, but to protecting its future." Rachel joined her at the window. Below, they could see several research vessels preparing for another expedition. Teams of scientists from different countries were working together, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "We're finding new things every day," Rachel said. "Marine species we never knew existed, better ways to predict and prevent natural disasters, solutions to problems we've struggled with for decades. And we're just beginning," Brian added. He pointed to a map showing the locations of other possible stations around the world. "There's so much more to discover." Emily touched the window glass gently. Somewhere in the dark depths below, the ancient station continued its work, now in partnership with its new guardians. The mysterious sounds that had first caught her attention had led to something far greater than she could have imagined. "The crystal beings believed in us," she said quietly. "They believed that whoever found their legacy would use it wisely. Now it's our turn to prove them right, not just for Earth's oceans, but for all the generations to come." As if in response, the monitoring screens showed new data arriving from the deep sea station. Another piece of the crystal beings' knowledge was ready to be understood. Humanity's next great adventure was just beginning.